Theming a story is one of the hardest parts of writing. It's so close to so many other elements of storytelling, but distinct enough to make it hard to grasp. It's a little like a subject or plotline, but it's more abstract and universal. It can be similar to a genre, but it's more modular and doesn't have to define itself by pre-existing categories. And yet, it's still something that can influence every single element of a story if it's done correctly. So now that we know what it isn't, what actually is a theme? Well, a theme is a concept, some sort of constant universal truth or message that speaks to the core of what the story wants to tell. A theme can be a moral or a cautionary tale, any one idea that the author seeks to explore or say something about. There's a lot of amazing examples of theming in media, but one of my favorite examples and the one that I want to explore in this video is a show called Copycat Killer. It's a Taiwanese crime drama that was released on Netflix in 2023 and became the first Taiwanese series to reach the Netflix top 10. Copycat Killer has some of the most universal and clear examples of theming I have ever seen. Yet in its later half, that theming falters in a very strange way. So weirdly, Copycat Killer is a fascinating example of how to perfectly incorporate a theme into your show, while also providing an example of how easily a theme can dissipate if not tended to carefully. Before we start, quick spoiler warning for Copycat Killer, and also a content warning for topics of murder and severe abuse. I think the best way to start out is to explore what the actual theme of the show is, and then we can delve into the many elements of Copycat Killer and see how they link back to that overarching theme. Copycat Killer is a show about family, but not in a way that a Saturday morning cartoon is. The series explores the lengths people are willing to go in order to protect their family, the ways in which your family circumstances can affect you, and how a background like that can influence the choices you make for the rest of your life. Specifically, the show likes to explore the dynamic between runaways, or people wanting to make a life for themselves away from their family, and their parents that still love them no matter what. With all of that said, let's talk about the main character and what they have to do with that central idea. Xiao-Qi is a serious yet sincere prosecutor in the series, someone who clearly has a lot of compassion for others despite his thorny and no-nonsense exterior. He very quickly becomes the central character in which we experience the story through. In his first introduction, we see how Xiao-Qi investigates his cases, often going above and beyond the call of duty in order to find out the truth. Particularly in the first case where a teenager is accused of murdering his own parents, Xiao-Qi spends hours figuring out whether or not it was possible for the kid to be responsible in a very creative way. Through this first plot point, we can see how committed Xiao-Qi is as a prosecutor, particularly in this first case that has to do with a family tragedy. As the show goes on, we get more and more insight into Xiao-Qi's personality. Part of his deep-seated dedication to solving cases comes from his own family circumstance. When he was young, his entire family was killed by a loan shark. Xiao-Qi blames himself for this event because in a fit of anger, he lied to the loan shark telling him that there's money in his family's home. He clearly carries this guilt with him for most of the story, letting it motivate him and push him to become a prosecutor. And even past that, the death of his family becomes a major factor in his slow deterioration throughout the show. We see very early on in a psychiatric evaluation that he has unstable tendencies due to the way his family died. Despite being able to pass the test and becoming an official prosecutor, he clearly struggles with the trauma from this incident. As we can see, even just in our main character, the idea of family is clearly integral to who he is in the show. The tragic deaths of his family motivates him to become a prosecutor in order to sentence criminals to a worthy punishment. But at the same time, it also plants a deep seed of pain and trauma in him, one that enables his most destructive and violent tendencies to punish criminals and get revenge on them for what they've done. Throughout the show, we see the ways in which Xiao-Qi's past still weighs on him, and compels him to act out of emotion and impulse. In the narrative, he starts as a representation of a moral and upright person who owes their current motivations to the tragedy of their past, showing how characters can grow through their trauma. In direct contrast to Xiao-Qi is the primary villain of the first major arc of the show, Shen Jiawun. Jiawun is a person with a terribly traumatic backstory. His older sister died in infancy, and ever since his birth, his mother projected all of her pain and trauma onto him. She would dress him up in girls' clothes and hit him when he would refuse. All of this traumatized Jiawun to an extent that he started seeing visions of his sister's ghost haunting him, threatening to take over his body and erase his existence. Because of his mental illness, Jiawun sees other women as a reflection of his sister and is only able to retain his sanity by killing them. This is what leads him to become a serial killer and eventually take the lives of many innocent victims. While this backstory doesn't even come close to justifying Jiawun's actions, we can clearly see the way in which his past has pushed him to the edge. His violent tendencies and criminal record are reflections of the abuse he experienced as a child, and his MO as a killer is primarily due to the ghostly visions that plague him. This is yet another example of the ways family, and specifically family-related trauma, can change the course of a person's life. While Xiaoqi was motivated to punish criminals due to his dark past, Zhaowen was unable to avoid becoming a murderer. These two are set up as opposites in the first half of the show, with Xiaoqi being the white knight to Zhaowen's overt villainy. However, as the show progresses, we start to witness the unraveling of Xiaoqi in his morality. In the second half of the show, the real person behind the string of killings starts to become clear, and despite knowing almost for certain that this person is responsible, there's no definitive evidence to speak of. This second half villain is going to become the topic of the later half of this video, but for now we'll limit the focus to just the ways in which this villain impacts our main character. Under the name of No, this killer enters into an openly antagonistic relationship with Xiaoqi, taunting him for the lives he's failed to save and resurfacing trauma about the prosecutor's past. In the second half of the show, our hero gets pushed further and further to the edge, taunted by the words of No, who frequently makes the claim that anyone can become a killer if the circumstances are correct. And eventually, No puts his theory into effect by killing Xiaoqi's ex-girlfriend. At this point in the story, Xiaoqi still doesn't have any way to arrest No, so out of anger he assaults him and almost kills him in the process. This second half of the story is a continuation of the theme of the first, with the idea being carried out on our hero. In the same way that Zhaowen was driven to insanity by the abuse he experienced as a kid, Xiaoqi snaps and assaults No out of pure rage, almost becoming a murderer in the process. The protagonist's journey explores a facet of the overall theme of the show, fully showing the journey that Xiaoqi goes on through the death of his loved ones. While the pain he experienced as a child molded him into a lawful prosecutor, it planted a seed of violence in his heart. And by worsening that trauma, No was able to push Xiaoqi into becoming someone capable of crime himself, showing both the positive and the negative ways you can change from a traumatic event. In the context of the story, No is meant to represent a sort of corrupting force. His murders are all with the intent of tearing families apart, humiliating them and testing the bonds that hold them together. Something that I noticed about the show that I'm not sure if was intentional was the choice of the villain's name. No, if styled in lowercase letters, spells you upside down, and No himself is a faceless killer who taunts people with the idea that anyone can become a killer. With all of those details, you can knit them together into a very interesting symbolic villain. No's name and his masked face are indicative of his primary goal, to prove that you, whoever is reading this, are just as much of a monster as he is. Again, I don't necessarily think this is intentional since the show always styles No with an uppercase N, which kind of breaks that connection, but I still think it's worth pointing out. However, the main issue with the show that I'll cover at the end has to do with No's true identity and how lacking I feel that it is. But for now, I still have a couple more positive elements to talk about, so let's keep that on the back burner. Continuing with the positive ways that the theme touches every aspect of the show, let's talk about the victims for a second. Pretty much every primary victim in the story have some very clear similarities with each other. They are all people with a struggling relationship with their parents, who in some way or another are trying to move away or escape their home. Some are doing it because of a conflict of identity, others because they crave the freedom of a life in a city, and even more still to pursue dreams or careers. But no matter what the reason, these motivations have caused a divide between them and their parents. In the story, the killer preys on people like this and kidnaps them, forcing their remaining family to humiliate themselves publicly in order to have the chance of getting them back. In the first example, we see how Yijun's father is forced to act like a dog for hours on end just for the chance to save his daughter, and how later he is compelled to go on television to beg the killer to return her. Similarly, the police officer Yong is told to go on the news and publicly apologize for being a bad father. And something similar happens to Yun Hui, a later victim of the villain who has to go on a late-night show in order to try and defend her brother. These are all incarnations of the overall theme of the show, the influence family, both alive and dead, have on our lives. Yet they all come in different flavors, in different contexts. Yijun's story is a tale of how religious difference can come in between different members of a family, with Yijun herself converting to Christianity and worrying about how that will affect her Buddhist father. Detective Yong's story talks about how being overly protective and restrictive of your child can sometimes come back to bite you, as Yong's daughter leaves home out of annoyance that her father keeps holding her back from her dreams. And Yun Hui's narrative discusses how families can be affected by rumors and allegations, with Yun Hui doing everything that she can in order to defend her dead brother who's being painted as a murderer. All of these stories are distinct, they all tell their own narratives and find their own conclusions, but they all stem from the same overarching theme. They all explore different avenues of the same truth. Detective Yong in particular is a further example of this, as he gets into a very similar situation to the main character. He's unable to find definitive evidence that proves the true identity of the killer, Jia-won, so out of anger he takes matters into his own hands and attempts to kill Jia-won himself. Despite being a very moral and upright person, he was corrupted into attempting to kill someone due to the influence of his family being in danger, echoing No's taunt. Anyone can become a killer if they're pushed far enough. This theme also spreads its roots on both sides of the line, to both heroes and villains. As I discussed earlier, Jia-won's MO is due to the abuse he experienced at the hands of his family, but one of the other major semi-antagonists also has motivations that link back to his parents. Kun-yi is a character that formally confesses to murder 2 years before the story starts, a murder that bears a number of similarities to the case that resurfaces in the current day. We get tipped off throughout the story that Kun-yi isn't actually the one responsible and that he's simply an accomplice or an assistant to the main villain. Kun-yi was originally friends with the people that committed the crime, however he was the only one to resist and attempt to stop his friends from going through with it. In showing his unwillingness to participate, he singles himself out and ends up being threatened into taking the blame for the entire incident. And the reason behind this once again goes back to the idea of family. His father is old and in a senior care home, and the main villain No threatens Kun-yi into confessing by promising to harm his father if the truth ever comes out. A lot of the main conflict in Kun-yi's character is from this incident, since he knows if he stays in prison he will never see his father again, but if he does anything to try and clear his name, his father probably won't survive. As you can see, almost every character in the story is linked back to the central theme of family. Even ones that I haven't named explicitly are implicated in the theme in some way or another. And that begs the question, what's No's deal? How does he link back to this overarching message? Well, the primary issue with the show is that he just doesn't. In this story where pretty much every important character has motivations or traits that stem from their family, in a story that does such a good job of embodying its theme in every aspect of its world, No's story has absolutely nothing to do with family. When we finally get to see No's backstory, we learn that he's just a sociopath. He's had violent and manipulative tendencies ever since he was young. Now let me be clear, I think it is a fallacy to say that every character in your story needs complex motivation. In fact, as long as they're executed well, I'm a huge fan of series that choose to openly depict antisocial personality disorders. But in such a family-oriented series, to make these central villains so devoid of connection to this theme just feels like a total misstep. Instead of having his character be based on some type of family-related history, or at least trying to bridge the gap between his psychopathy and his family in some way that fuels his current actions, the story completely shifts to a different theme. No's real identity is as a TV host who wants to become famous. He takes a lot of pride in having eyes on him and has been trying to get in front of the camera for years. This whole serial killing thing is something he does and takes great pride in, as it allows his media personality to gain more attention and popularity. This is ultimately what ends up defeating No too. He's lured out by the main character challenging his pride on the airways, mocking him openly in a way that forces No to confess to his crimes. First off, the entire ending felt a bit lacking in my opinion, but secondly, this entire finale completely abandons the previous theme of the show. By this point in the narrative, a lot of the secondary characters have fallen away or been killed off. And after the conclusion of the previous episode where Shao-Chi reaches the end of his arc by attempting to kill No, that's pretty much the end of his development in regards to the theme of family. Pretty much the entire crux of the show shifts to the story about arrogance and media and the ways that someone can use the news to control people. It really feels like a different show by this point, and I don't understand why it had to get here. The previous villain was completely serviceable for the story this show wanted to tell, but he gets killed off very unceremoniously by episode 7. I feel like the show could have shifted all of its major plot points over and condensed them into the first 8 episodes of the show, completely forgoing No's actual identity. While Jia-won is a bit too unstable and insane to be the type of criminal mastermind that the show seems to want, I think the story would have been so much more impactful if he remained as the central villain. He is someone who actually has deep ties to No's message. He clearly has some minute level of guilt for his actions and has turned to the life he has due to the trauma he's been forced to go through. It makes so much more sense for Jia-won to attempt to use other people's trauma to make them into killers as well, like Detective Yong and Shao-Chi, since this would validate his existence by proving anyone can become broken just like he was. I really feel like a different team of writers came in to make the last few episodes of the show. While I think aesthetically No is a really cool villain in his dual personality as a news reporter and serial killer, but he's ultimately just empty. His motivations would suit him well in a different story, but in the show Copycat Killer has been up until this point, he just feels off, like he was tacked on as an afterthought. His inclusion in the story completely ruins so many of the earlier themes of family and trauma, showing that behind an interesting MO and visual identity, No's killings have no substance. No himself has no connection to the words he's saying, and is just trying to fuel his own rise to stardom, a choice that completely ruins the earlier theme of the show. A theme is at its best when its influence can be felt in every fiber of a story. Though not obvious, the central concept behind a world should always be there if you're willing to look for it. And Copycat Killer does such an amazing job incorporating that theme into every nook and cranny of this world. However, it also fails spectacularly in actually following through on this initial theming. The loss of care and attention to detail in the latter half is a perfect example of how theming can slip away from you in the blink of an eye. And in that way, I think Copycat Killer is a really interesting example of both a good and bad approach to theming, somehow existing in the exact same show. Thank you guys so much for watching. I know this is a far cry from the usual video that I make, but I hope you guys enjoyed it. I like being able to branch out and talk about whatever media as long as there's a good story or idea behind it. So if you watched this far, sincerely, thank you for being here.